Welcome back to The Work in our live wrap party. For those of you who have been following along with this project, we're happy to now bring to you all of our participants. And we're going to have a group conversation about all things Chicago film. Just a little background for those who may not have gotten this initial information, but this project, The Work, started as an informal kind of conversation between Curtis Matsky and myself. And we thought that it would be interesting to start basically interrogating our colleagues in the film community about, what makes you do what you do? Why do you do what you do? How do you do what you do? And to fixate on the process of filmmaking. There are a lot of other resources out there for, promoting work and talking about various, things that you may be doing, but there's not a lot of like nitty gritty. This is how I make a schedule. This is how I budget. This is how I storyboard. I don't believe in storyboarding sort of conversations, and we wanted to start bringing those to the fore. Curtis, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the things that interested me early on was I think it's important to hear other people speak the same language as you as like a filmmaker or anyone in kind of like a creative field. I think I've been a big fan of the film independent talks that have been coming out over quarantine and stuff like that, where you just hear other, directors and things like that talk about their process. And yeah, some of our conversations got, a little bit more like philosophical, which is good, but then some of them are a little bit more substantive as far as ideas and process like you talked about. But yeah, in general, we didn't want to kind of really do it necessarily like a series per se, but kind of more like a catalog of conversations that you can always go back to and reference, or if you're feeling, disheartened by, your lack of strategy or your, your recent collaborations or, things like that, or successes, failures, the different topics that we covered, you can go back and hopefully be a little bit, re-energized about those things. Along those lines, we did come up with a manifesto for our conversations, which we did send to all our participants here, but I don't know if people watching necessarily saw those, so I'm going to just go through those bullets real quick. So some of our kind of main things to cut for the manifesto were just attempt substantive conversations specifically about the process and the work, avoid small talk and excessive flattery, no plugs, no direct appeals to your own brand or career aspirations, be curious, ask questions only for which you want real answers, stay humble, be mindful of excessive name dropping, grandstanding, and the need to sound smart or hear your own voice. Be as rigorous, self-critical, and exacting in your questions, answers, and explanations as is possible. Value minutia over generalities, the personal over the generic, and finally just being honest. So I think all these kind of conversations with those guidelines in mind kind of help create a bigger, more successful community, and part of what we want to go for.
So why don't we quickly just run through everybody, and you can say who you are, describe yourself as a filmmaker in as short a time as possible, and maybe what neighborhood you're representing, just because it's a Chicago sort of thing. So Grace, you want to start?
Sure thing. I'm Grace Hahn. I'm a creative producer. I am in Uptown. I think Uptown is the raddest and has the best food in Chicago. And my thing was on the producer's philosophy, which was, to me, just a lot of rambling about stuff that I've gleaned over the past 5 years, but I think was kind of, as Curtis said, fun to watch, to kind of remind myself what I'm doing and what I'm trying to improve upon and things of that nature. So
cool, thank you. Kevin?
Hi, my name is Kevin Pickman. I'm a writer-director. I hail from Lincoln Square. Our episode, Curtis and I, we talked about confidence, which quickly transformed into insecurities. Yeah.
Right on. Jim?
Hey everybody, I am Jim Vendiola. I am a writer director as well. I am based in Pilsen currently, and Curtis and I had a discussion about strategy, which I think at a very high level was kind of about a lot of these best practices that seem to work on like bigger commercial projects and how to sort of distill that or subvert those things, basically when you have no money.
Great, thanks. Mishu?
Hey everyone, I'm Mishu Hilmi. I write, direct, produce, edit, self-loathe on a regular basis. I live in Edgewater. Me and Bradley, we had a discussion about, I think, strongly held beliefs, which I believe it was the hour and 5, so far the longest chat of all. And I think for every chunk I spoke for maybe about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and then Bradley went on a real 8-minute tear for each chunk. So I don't know if that counts as grandstanding, but we'll see.
You told no lies.
These
Lily?
were fun to edit.
Oh, I'm Lily, and I'm a baby screenwriter, and I'm repped over at Verve. And I represent downtown.
Nice, thank you. Emily?
Hi, I'm Emily. I talked with Bradley about collaboration, and I live in Lincoln Square.
Robert? You are muted.
Now tells you that as I start speaking. Sorry, my name is Robert Carter. I'm a writer, director, and I live in Ukrainian Village. And Bradley and I talked about failure, which I'm familiar with. I'm very familiar with what to say about it.
We called it challenges, Robert, because we didn't want to insult you too much, but
Failures are very challenging. No, but it was a good discussion, and I think it's good to talk about the negative stuff and how to overcome it and all that. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. So, let's just talk. Curtis and I had come up with a couple of questions. The first of which is kind of a general one, but what comes to mind when you hear the words Chicago film? What does that mean to everybody? As a city, we're not probably nationally known for our filmmaking, but there are a lot of talented people here living within the confines of our city. And we just want to know from the inside, what do you think we're projecting outwards, and how could we define ourselves as a city in relationship to filmmaking? So if anyone has thoughts.
Well, I've been working with a handful of productions that are coming from out of city, out of state, and I think I guess a good place to start maybe is what Chicago film is not, and oftentimes that ends up with me describing a lot of benefits, I think, to bigger coastal production spaces. And oftentimes it's budget wise, and oftentimes it makes these other producers smile because they're like, holy, you have a 30% tax credit. You guys, your day rates actually make sense for on-set crew, and you can negotiate. Negotiating means an entirely different thing here. So I think, if anything, that's just proof that I don't by any means feel like I know Chicago film to a T, but it means that it's developed, at least in the past 20, 30 years, into something pretty specific when it comes to regional production.
Mm-hmm.
Else chime in?
I think for me, in terms of aesthetics, you know, I don't know if maybe it all depends on where everyone was at when they kind of first were introduced to Chicago film. But for me, it was like just the, you know, early 2000s mumblecore. And for whatever reason, that's seared into me as Midwest or Chicago, you know, only available lighting, improvised scripts, mumbly, for better for worse, right? So I don't know where it's, you know, on the production side, I think Grace, you probably have a better perspective on it, but on the aesthetics side, that's where my baseline was, and I'm just curious what the evolution from that sort of stamp of early 2000 mumblecore to, you know, 20 years later, is it more on identity politic? Is it more, is there a stronger sense of visual strength than just, you know, Panasonic video camcorders that are just close-ups on people's faces?
Yeah, I was ready to say the exact same thing, because like early 2000s, I was still living in the Kansas City area, and that's when mumblecore really took off, and everyone had films there from in South by, and then finally moving to Chicago and still wanting to be very much a part of that whole scene. Just that, you know, it is the run and gun, like Panasonic, available lighting, character driven stuff, stories. And then the more time I stay here, I see it like even expand into larger things where there's just like so many different scenes. So like, I mean, obviously as technology advances, so does the, you know, I see a lot of movies that are still basically take that structure of like mumblecore character pieces, but now try to deliver it in a more cinematic approach, I guess, for lack of better words. And then that just connected with Chicago's long history with improv and comedy in general. Those are, for me, those are always connected or linked in some way.
Yes, there is this tendency, I guess, with all of the hubs of filmmaking that exist around the country, obviously Los Angeles being the predominant one, but New York and now Atlanta and Austin, et cetera, to kind of define a, you know, what, you know, the old studio system having like a house style. So like, we all know what a Hollywood film is, or at least most people, we all pretend to know what a Hollywood film is, I guess, in some fashion, collectively. And it's interesting to see how, what opportunities exist for other places to develop their own style. And, you know, that's often been phrased in terms of a negative sort of thing, like, oh, you're not able to make a big budgeted tentpole $1 million film franchise thing. But I'm curious to know if people have ideas or feelings about how to successfully, you know, use what Chicago does have, like as Kevin just mentioned. We have a long history of improv. We have some of the great theater actors in the country here. We have one of the best, if not the best, you know, amount of you know, repertory and art house type places like the Music Box and Gene Siskel and Doc Films, et cetera, et cetera. We have like a vibrant cinephile community, and obviously we have all the things that Chicago provides in terms of locations, the variety. You know, about the only thing that everybody like all agrees on that we wish we had better is a little bit warmer weather. But other than that, we seem to have a lot of components. So what are people's thoughts on that, maybe?
So I would say that one thing I really love about being a filmmaker in Chicago is that you can, like you said, there is so much talent here on the acting side and also the production side that, like, I think it's a very liberating place to be a filmmaker, because you can, you can live here much more affordably than New York or LA. So you just have like a lot more freedom in what you make and how you experiment with stuff. And I think I don't know, there's like, it's just a very strong like learning community vibe here. Not to say that there isn't like really high-end professional stuff going on here. Of course there is, but like I think being somebody who's working and like trying to figure out and like, you know, like for me, like as I was like trying to find my voice and stuff like that, it was very easy to make stuff that was not expensive in any way and have like really eager people to work on it that weren't like trying to like figure out how, you know, this like web series was gonna like, you know, get them an agent or like some like, you know, move their career forward in any way. Like people just like really genuinely interested in doing work and also finding their voice. So I don't know if that translates to like a broader aesthetic that like Chicago film has, but I think it makes it a really like great place to be.
I think that's a good point of like what is the end game and the bottom line. Because I feel like here, if you're a writer director and you want to be an auteur, you'll like seek management and, you know, see how far you can get with your script or your project on, you know, the festival run, on a festival run, or find distribution. But I think outside of that, and I'm always thinking too about like the like day play culture of people working in this city. It's so huge of folks who are just working in electric for their career and want to be contributing to the creative through like camera, through art. And that's like really significant. That's a really significant amount of the people working here in Chicago are actually not the writer director type. So I think that's important to think about too, that their bottom line is just to be involved in the creation of art and not to end up moving to LA where they'll, you know, make it big or whatever, which like personally is just something that I don't find attractive. So I think it's really cool to be here in Chicago where it's like open enough and visible enough to see people whose, you know, bottom line goal isn't money and success, you know, success, but it's more collaboration and contribution.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like, I mean, so part of the question is like, do these definitions like really even matter? Like how, as far as like, you know, like is the Chicago aesthetic or process or whatever, like is defining that alone, you know, important? There's always kind of like a weird disconnect where, you know, we talked about like how everything's so spread out in Chicago. You know, you have these kind of groups of people and parts of the community that, you know, even just like in this room, like, you know, we all have our own kind of people and islands that we kind of work with. And it can all be very different aesthetically, but like, you know, how do like, should we try and put everything under one umbrella, or is that kind of disadvantageous to, you know, the overall community or not?
I mean, I think it's reductive, right? It's other than it being kind of a pop question, like what is the Chicago style, what is the LA style? I think the only advantage is it offers an opportunity to maybe see it or look at our community with a perspective or a thorough lens. But, you know, we all have different styles, and there's probably a very mumbly style in LA or in Omaha or wherever. So I do agree, Curtis, that it's not necessarily the most helpful question. It's maybe just kind of a fun sort of a softball question, maybe to get every filmmaker's kind of hot take on what we think the style is. But it's almost risky in that we're generalizing all the incredibly idiosyncratic and honest players, not only in our city, but, you know, every city that wants to pursue this medium.
Yeah, just to follow up just briefly on that too, I do think that part of the issue is that Chicago always has the issue of like trying to prove itself in comparison to these other cities. And I don't think that's kind of like a necessary thing to do when, like, you know, it will never be LA or New York or these other places. So it's like, it's just do the thing yourself and however you want to do it. But understand you're still probably going to have a relationship with people in LA if you want to move to the next, like Lily has, you know, very well, you know, accomplished. But like, it's very, there shouldn't be like a Chicago first mentality, in my opinion. because it's, again, very reductive and unnecessary part of the dialogue.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of sort of just melts away year after year as far as, you know, like, yeah, like Lily was saying in her episode where it's like she's able to take meetings like via Skype or Google Hangouts or whatever. Because it's like, why not? We have the technology. Why does the zip code matter? Like it's kind of silly. But yeah.
Yeah, I really, I think maybe like many people that don't live in LA have benefited from the pandemic, simply because, like I said before, the difference between myself and the writer that's just a block away from Warner Brothers or Paramount is zero. We're both getting there the same way, and that's on this camera. And so versus saying I'm in Chicago and you're in LA, it's more about how can we do this together from where we are, because everyone's doing it so differently. You know, a lot of people that are in LA are not necessarily working out of LA. They're working out of their parents' house, or they've gone on location somewhere else because why not? And so I've definitely learned from this. So, Chicago's much more grounded in the way we feel, I think, and the way we process the reality and the difficulties of filmmaking, because we anticipate the road being, or the hill being higher. In LA, everyone's like a dreamer, and it's just like, it's gonna work, it's gonna be great. And I don't go into it like that at all. I'm like, I don't know, that sounds expensive, and doesn't sound really feasible. And why would anyone want to make my project when there's a million others? So, but hearing their optimism and why they think things can work against my typical Chicago, I don't know, together, I think melds a positive learning experience.
Yeah, if anything, it's like that Midwest sensibility, right? Where it's like, I feel like we take from like our like daily approach is like kind of like also with filmmaking, where it's like this weird like, oh well, maybe that's too expensive, or oh well, no one really want to see what I have to say, or like,
Right.
which kind of gets in the way. I mean, there's like pros and cons to it, right? Like with anything, like, but yeah, it's like this filmmaking with like I don't know, this weird like humility, or like almost sometime like almost embarrassment, or like I'm not good enough type. It's like, because Chicago's always had a chip on its shoulder, like Curtis was saying, like it's always trying to compete with New York or LA. And sometimes you'll see movies that try to just copy that mode. It's like, well, it looks good, that's what matters, right? And then they forget any type of substance whatsoever. And it's like, well, why are you doing this? Like, you should be doing it. It's like you want to tell a story, and you just don't want it to be visually glitzy. Like, well, what's the point of that? But
One of the things that, go ahead, Emily.
One of the things that I noticed too is because there's such a like turnover of productions in Los Angeles that there's a little bit more jadedness of working with the community in Los Angeles as an independent filmmaker. I was there for 10 years, and it's just like there's such a casualness about productions that a lot of the community didn't want to be involved, and they kind of, would put up walls about like supporting or allowing you to film in their venue. And that was one of the great things about coming to Chicago and filming in like 2015 and 16. I really got to like go and knock on people's doors and be like, hey, this is a wonderful place. Can we film here? And people were like, film a movie? What? And they were really got excited about it. So that is great, is not having that like industry town like Los Angeles has. You don't have all those bad connotations necessarily associated. As an independent filmmaker, you can kind of get in the door with other people.
I was going to say, a lot of people in LA are actually not from LA. They're kind of from all over. And I also think that's a big difference. A lot of Chicago filmmakers, gravitated to Chicago when we've been here a long period of time. A lot of people in LA, it's their first year, it's their fifth year. They're from all over the place. And the thing that brought them there is the same thing, this wonderment for a dream that's probably out of grasp and willing to do anything to get it, and to say anything to make it feel like they've got it. Whereas in Chicago, like I said, we're so much more grounded in the fact that maybe we're not quite full believers, but we really want to work really hard. But we're mostly all residents here.
Yeah, it's a good question as to like, when do you become jaded, essentially, is what we're saying. So it's like a lot of people go to LA and they work in the industry for like 10 years and then they hate it, right? And they're kind of like done. But like, we're kind of a little bit more conditioned to be ready and like manage our expectations as to, you know, where to go and what, you know, what we want to achieve, I think. But I think that like the other thing that I thought of, you know, when you guys were talking was that the Chicago-ness, like saying you're a Chicago filmmaker does actually make you stand out too. If you're talking to certain people in LA and or wherever, it's just like, you know, there are a lot of people out there who like, when you find that connection, like it's an interesting thing to play off of. Like there's still a unique part of, you have to embrace your own story as a person and as a filmmaker, and being in and from Chicago is still a unique thing to tell people. And I think that there is that certain Midwest earnestness that can make you attractive in some of these kind of things, opposed to the 10 people who have been in LA for, you know, however many years and have the same kind of mentality.
I found that being like vocally passionate about it as well is productive. Yeah. Like at least as a producer, in conversations that I've had, folks they're eager to hear more about what that means to be a Chicago filmmaker.
I was in a meeting recently where someone was like, your Chicago accent's so thick. They were like, you must be so Midwestern. Like, to me, I sound totally fine. They sounded super California, you know? They're like, we love talking to Chicago filmmakers. You guys sound so funny. I was like, what?
Yeah, there's definitely does seem to be a self-deprecating streak that's running through everybody's answers. And
We're a
sort of,
bunch.
sorry. Okay, yeah, and also a sort of, I wouldn't say that we're afraid of success, but we're kind of wary about it on some level. And I don't know that, I think that's a good self-defense mechanism, but I don't know that we need to be, because as we've, you know, discovered and know, there's a lot of great stuff going on that we should be incredibly proud of. Shifting the topics to kind of the opposite direction, maybe we've talked about some of the opportunities that exist via not being a part of kind of a Hollywood system where everything is established and there's, you know, a certain sort of way things go about, and you know, that we're being Chicago filmmakers, we're allowed to be a little bit more idiosyncratic and personal and individualized in our own individual processes. But maybe we could also shift the conversation to talk about some of the things that as a community you see that we could be doing better. And that could be in any direction you want to take it. I mean, there's obvious directions to take it, and some of those need to be discussed. So, I mean, we can talk about what the lack of infrastructure does for us. Curtis has already kind of mentioned about the spread out nature. We're all kind of in different neighborhoods, and I don't know how much interaction we're having outside of those neighborhoods. There's always ongoing conversations about inclusion and diversity that can be talked about. So I don't know, what are people's thoughts on areas where, let's phrase it in the most positive frame possible. What are areas that we can improve upon as Chicago filmmaking community?
Maybe it's a privileged position, but I think payment, like I've never produced something in theater or in film where I expect someone to show up for free and work 12 hours. And I think whether it's New York or even Chicago, that I think it's a privileged mindset to say, I have such an important vision or story that I'm not going to compensate. If that's the default, then there needs to be at least incredible boundaries, because I think, because film is so expensive and the barrier of entry is so high that people or certain groups and communities can, ask for free labor. And if it's, a fair discussion, then fine. But I just think that's that's my hang up, seeing all these like email chains like, hey, can someone give me a free PA, a free this, a free that? And maybe I'm so neurotic or insecure that I wouldn't dare, or I don't have the courage to just be like show up and do my story for free. But at least that's, where I really would wish that there were more, a bigger well of finances to spread around, or more support that it could be fiscally responsible rather than just creating. But that's kind of where I'm at.
I think it also depends on the phase of where you're at in your career as well, because I mean, I think at this point now I wouldn't even consider roping anybody into anything I'm doing without any type of compensation. And 10 years ago, I mean, it was a completely different conversation. It was just kind of like, hey, want to help me make this movie? It'll be fun. Pretty low stakes, but also, that those people probably, didn't get a ton out of it other than, hey, this is cool to try sometime, but, also they had to stick with it when it still got rough without any sort of like, compensation other than getting fed on those days. So, yeah, I mean, and then, also I think for me, my time it feels super important now than it did, back then. So, I mean, from a personal standpoint, I wouldn't consider doing that to anybody at any point at this point in my career.
Yeah, I think Jim's right. Like, I think kind of depends on where you are in your career. Like, because like a lot of kids like coming out of like Columbia or DePaul, they've all like, I feel like that film school has this sense of community where everyone's crewing up on other people's stuff. And the idea is like, okay, you gaff for me, I'll gaff for you on the next project. And so that mentality kind of carries out after film school. But then the problem is then it's not as collaborative, because then you're become focused on your career and you have no more time to give to other people's stuff. So I feel like there is like, I will see like email chains all the time asking for like free stuff, and it's just like, it's like that's fine if you're like giving back, but like if you're gonna ask for something, make sure you're giving it, paying it forward. Make sure you're crewing on somebody else's stuff. Like actively, like don't wait to be like asked. Like if you're gonna ask, then you also need to like donate your time. But yeah, it gets hard to do that. It gets hard to, like, me personally, like I'm at the point where it's like I'm like Mishu, like I can't imagine asking anybody to like give up an hour of their day to come see or to come help me create my vision. Like that sounds disgusting to me. But it's like I have to like save up and make sure I can flip the bill when it comes to it, because I can't give back at this point where it's like my life's just I'm too chaotic. Like I barely can carve out enough time to write. So it's like yeah, it's kind of that weird transition.
Yeah, I was just gonna say there's a lot that we can go into a long conversation about how messed up the economics of filmmaking is in every level. But I think, speaking kind of to what Jim said, I think, yeah, everyone has a point in their career where they have to decide what is worth it and what is not, to commit to. And then, I mean, I've felt it a little bit recently with just like some consulting stuff, and like, whether it's like on a packet or a script, reading for people. But you have to kind of, Kevin's absolutely right that you have to like, pay it forward, and, everyone has to know kind of what they're getting into in these conversations. If it's like dealing with like a friend reading a script, if you're gonna, pay that forward and read, their script in return, etc. But speaking to the, Kevin brought up like the student stuff when you talk about like Chicago, and we have Columbia, DePaul, all these schools, which are great resources, and then we have the TV stuff down at CineSpace. I always think there's an interesting kind of divide in that then there's like other independent filmmakers who are kind of like in the middle of things, and it's like finding the balance between these kind of bigger productions and then these student productions on the other side. It is weird to navigate when you're like crewing up for stuff. So that's one thing that like I would point as, I don't know if I'd call it like a necessarily a problem, because there's obviously those are great things, but it's like finding that kind of middle class of filmmaker and kind of helping support them, whether it is financially or in other aspects, is the thing that needs to be kind of looked at every once in a while. Does that make sense?
To me, from a production perspective, I see the solution to some of these like problems that maybe we're discussing right now revolves a lot around like transparency and communication in developing the feasibility of an actual production. And that's something that I'm constantly checking myself on and trying to be better about. But that helps you prevent the possibility that you might be taking advantage of someone who really should be being compensated for work that they're doing, rather than someone who doesn't need to. And having those conversations individually, not just within the higher ups, not just within production or whatever. You don't get to decide someone's value. It is a discussion with them. And Bradley and I in our talk had a conversation about like recognition and understanding value. And so much of that is in communication. You don't just decide like whether your PA needs to be paid or not. If you don't have the money to pay a PA, find someone who's willing and able to do that work without being paid. That's like the whole idea, but I feel like so many people hopscotch around over that type of stuff. And then all of a sudden, I know all of us have probably been in this position at some point. I've been in this position, could say at least once with every project that I've been on, where I've done a shitload of work and have made no money and contributed probably a significant amount of my own money into it. So I think on every level, that's something that those in the leadership positions of these middle ground productions between that kind of like student stuff and, projects with sufficient budgets should be mindful of.
Anyone else? Any general thoughts?
I don't have thoughts on that issue. I think everyone said everything that I would be able to say. I was going to say the one thing I always felt like Chicago could be better with is like community hangout things. There's like a good community for sure, and I think people are very friendly and like helpful in very material ways with labor and advice and all those things. And I think that's great. My dream was always that there would be like some kind of watering hole or something that everyone would like hang out at, and like some bar somewhere centrally located where you could like go on a Friday night and like just run into people or whatever. And it always just seemed hard to like create like a social aspect around filmmaking that wasn't just like drinks after production or something like that. Especially as a writer director, it's like I'm really only making one thing a year at most. So I don't know if people have like thoughts on that or whatever, but I thought it would be great if like we all, had like a bar or a cafe we all hung out at. Lily?
Yeah, I think the best part for me about being part of this project with Bradley and Curtis has been that I only know 3 Chicago filmmakers. It's Neil Edelstein is a friend, Curtis, and Robert. And Grace and Emily are the only 2 female Chicago filmmakers I've ever seen, like as far as like being tied into association with the same project. And so I was really, I really enjoyed watching your videos, maybe more so than the guys, because I just was more curious to hear your perspective on things because I don't know that many. And I mentioned in my video that it's a weird thing. I live here. I have lived here since I was 18. And all the Chicago, or not Chicago, all the filmmakers that I have a social aspect and a key constant line of communication with don't live here, other than Curtis, Neil, and Robert. And it's not that I don't see that there's on occasion like a Facebook post that says, oh, there's going to be a female group of whatever, something or whatever, or a student filming, but I'm not a student, and B, a lot of those things are just kind of like pop-ups that show up on Facebook. And as we talked about before we went live, a lot of us turn off those notifications to begin with anyway. So yeah, I mean, Robert was so nice, you know, before the pandemic, he took me with him to the Midwest Film Festival to watch his film, and that was great. And then other than that, and that's when I saw Curtis. I was like, and other than that, never with offer, or no one wanted to meet me before. So I do wish there was more community that was, I think, a thicker thread for all of us to kind of jump on. Right now it's pieces.
Yeah.
I wonder if that type of thing exists in like different cities, or is this unique just to Chicago? Because like Robert's saying, like, I wish there was a bar or something. And like, you'll get that with a theater community. Like you'll have like, everyone's like, oh, let's hang out at Long Room or something, and they'll all get together. But like filmmaking is so siloed. I mean, that's why it's kind of cool that you guys have started these chats, because it is like, especially from like a writer director standpoint, like we don't really get to collaborate with other people, say like an actor would. It's like, we don't get to really, I don't know, like talk shop much unless you have like a personal relationship. But yeah, I wonder if if that's a unique thing to Chicago, or if it's like, does LA or like New York have that bar where it's like all these people get together and hang
I don't
out?
think so. Or just from my like talking to people, I don't think like it's necessarily that much better in New York. Although maybe just because of like institutions like IFP or something like that, where people would be going to like there's sort of like a center of gravity for things where people would all be going to the same events. But I don't know LA. Well,
like historically, Los Angeles has had places like that. I haven't lived there in a while, and I don't know if they're still in existence, but like back in studio days and what have you, people meeting and whatnot. But I think maybe that's partially the reason why we don't have as much in Chicago, is because we're having to do work on like the actual infrastructure of filmmaking, putting so much work into creating that we also haven't found the time to maybe do some of the more personable aspects of what this is, a collaborative art form. And so you really do have to carve out time and intention to make something like that happen. And I agree that would be a nice thing, a nice component to, you know, I don't think any of us have the answers, but like at least to start thinking about more out loud. And that would be the first step in that process, I think. But
yeah, I was just going to say that I mean, I could go off about like networking events for a while, but it's as far as like, yeah, that kind of forced interaction versus, you know, those natural discussions and treating the film community or just film as an art form before a business is still like vitally important to, you know, be reminded of just like periodically. I think sometimes, you know, you don't want to go to a networking event and just, you know, be bombarded with, you know, business cards from recent Columbia grads and stuff like that, or whatever. And I think, yeah, having organic discussions about process like this are just constantly have to kind of come up again.
Well, in my mind, I'm like, maybe that's just like up to us to make those spaces, right?
Absolutely.
The infrastructure doesn't exist. It's kind of like, you can't will that into existence, just kind of do it, which is a lot of Chicago production anyways. So we're very capable of that.
True.
I mean, I think it could also just be the nature of the medium, right? While theater is community-based in the truest sense. It's a physical piece of property that has, whether it's a 2-mile or 5-mile radius, where after rehearsal or after production, you can just go to, the Old Town Ale House or whatever. While the nature of the medium of filmmaking is that it is intended for some kind of scale, right, to replicate and be on screens. So I think that's just at least my kind of bullshit opinion on it, where people who might be drawn to that medium might not be thinking as locally as a community theater, but more of a, oh, I'd love my work to be on 500 screens across the United States. I don't know if that would have any sort of mindset where it might be more, again, business minded, fiscal minded, or success minded, that theater invites perhaps more of a, I love this craft and I love my community, while filmmaking to some degree might not serve your local community, right? It might serve a corporation's pocketbooks or your own pocketbooks. While theater, I don't think anyone goes into theater thinking this production is going to make $1 million, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of always dreamed about film being able to be more like theater, and being able to work with like a stock company, essentially, of repeat actors and crew members that you form a common bond with and a shorthand with. I think that's how you can make the best projects, actually. But in as far as any of that applies to like bringing us to more have more social cohesion, are we going to each other's premieres? Not because we feel obligated, but because we're actually trying to support one another. That's just like a very basic thing. Are we, doing some of the things that some of everybody mentioned, like, reading scripts and giving feedback, and not just going to feedback to get our own personal feedback. I mean, there is a sort of, especially the type of filmmaking that I think most of us are engaged in. I don't think we're in it to be rich either. Or if we are, we're probably doing it wrong. And we need serious financial advice. So I think there is a sort of, we are going to come out on the short end more often than not, or at least sometimes. And maybe there's a certain acceptance of that one has to have in order to be involved in independent filmmaking. But there's rewards. There's great rewards in seeing your colleagues' film finally get made, because we all know what that struggle is. Everybody here has had incredibly dark moments when it comes to their own artistic practice. So even to make a bad film, it takes an incredible amount of will and energy, let alone a good film. And so, there's shared goodwill that I think would engender more of what Robert's talking about and getting started. Speaking of that, like, how do people stay motivated?
Great transition.
Yeah. I mean, I think we are kind of talking around the issue of like how to make things sustainable, how to stay invested. And I think building community is one of the great ways to do that. But I don't know, what are people's thoughts on motivation? And where are you with your own personal motivation right now? We're in the middle of a pandemic. People are, obviously the horribleness of all of that, but like, people are continuing to make art, or at least trying to. And so where is everybody in like their mental space, I guess?
For me, one thing I really like Lily's talk, to have consistent, it's not like inner check-ins, goals, right? Annual goals that's iterated upon. And to me, that it's nice and so refreshing to see someone actually discuss the more ambitious sides of how to tackle the year. So it's so much kudos to you, Lily, on that. I really kind of resonated with that. So I agree, for me, it's curiosity and really just the brutal honesty of every year or every 6 months or 3 months to check in and see where I might have let insecurity or hungry ambition kind of destroy my original intent. But yeah, I think just having conversations with myself and being curious and bringing it back to the process and not that sexy byproduct of money or wins or likes or whatnot.
I'm really inspired by seeing videos like this. But the thing that keeps me going, honestly, for gasoline and when I just can't do it anymore, it's seeing other filmmakers or hearing them and having those conversations. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was very much in Arrested Development. I kept staring at that blinking icon that had no words. And then I called my mentor, who's successful, and I was just like, doesn't this suck? There's no motivation, there's no inspiration. I don't feel like doing anything right now. And he goes, what are you talking about? He goes, this is my dream. I'm going to be locked in where I'm typing so much. And he was like, I finished my lookbook. I finished 2 pilots and I'm working on my friend's film. And I was like, oh yeah, me too. I was kidding. I'm inspired to write too. No. And hung up. And then like just having that conversation though, knowing that I was over here being like, I'm out of Doritos. And he was over there being like, no, I'm crushing it. I'm doing things. I was just like, okay, now like, let's go. It's real. And then like seeing Grace and Emily's videos, just hearing them like constantly be like, keep going, you gotta work at it. And like, I find these things inspiring, especially when I feel like I don't have any energy left. And it's like we're all running in the same race, but if they're still running and I'm walking, like I gotta pick it up. And I find true motivation there.
That's another situation where I find transparency really helpful. It's in between all of us as peers. And I could probably like more than a dozen times I had like decided that I was going to quit this industry and it was just not sustainable and it was not going to work for me and I was wasting my time and wasting all of my money. But every time I did that, then I would say, well, you know what, maybe try and like go to your friends, screening of their web series and then just like go hang out with these people that you like and remember how much they've grown since you met them and remember how much you've grown since you met them. And then that growth becomes like the kind of inspiring motivator that you're like lacking at times when you just think you're going nowhere, right? So I think that absolutely resonates and is probably a big common denominator here of like, we do rely on one another. And I think in Chicago, again, the idea is collaborating and supporting one another over competition. I think you very rarely find competition in artists of our caliber in this city. So I just think that's something that I'm always grateful for.
Whenever I feel resentful or deeply envious or jealous of someone's work, I like feel it out for a couple minutes and then desperately try and figure out how can I get that person's email address and just at least say hello and share earnest and honest feedback. Because I know, from my years of theater in New York City, it was so easy to fester and kind of sit in my self-pity. And it took a while to just learn a strategy of, I just want to reach out and share my earnest opinion and praise the effort that this person did in creating it, and to have no intent of like, how can I siphon a meeting or whatnot. But that's been one strategy to help me get over the insecurity. Just go, I'm going to try and email this person and say I like their work.
Yeah, I don't think we do enough of that. So, I mean, it's definitely something to be mindful of.
People love getting compliments. So it is a thing. Like if you just come at it genuinely, like I've done that before. I've just like started conversations, relationships, like, oh, I just really like your thing. You're like, that's cool. Like that's enough to just get going with something. And, you don't need, you never know how a relationship will develop too over time.
Yeah.
Any other things for staying motivated or like any specific kind of like, setting deadlines for yourself, goals throughout the year or anything like that? We talked a lot about that, obviously, in our
conversation. I'm big on setting goals.
Yeah.
My internet connection is just a little unstable, so I might be frozen for a second. But yeah, I started setting goals right away, but that's just because I'm an obsessive compulsive calendar freak. I like having a marker on the calendar that says this is the day this thing will happen, and this is the day if it hasn't happened, then I have to go 10 times harder. And so yeah, goal number one was to place in a competition that I thought was a respectable competition, then get a manager, then get an agent, then try and actually make something. So yeah, but I'm really hard on myself about it. When I see that calendar date approaching, whew, lots of Doritos, lots of donuts, lots of wine. But I think it was, it was mentioned that, like Michi said, he likes to send an email or something. I'll try and get someone's email address and like be like, kudos to you, but good, that's wonderful. Jealousy in there. That's something that's also though very LA, I have found, less Chicago, is like a lot of the directors or producers or fellow writers that are based in LA have written me or been like, sent me a DM on my Instagram or my Twitter, which is super common for them, by the way. They love to DM your Twitter and be like, hey, I saw you placed, or hey, you've been crushing it in this thing, or oh, I beat you in that other one finally. And be like, hey, we should meet up on Zoom, or hey, we're going to do this workshop and we're all going to do a writing session or something. And they love to stalk out and hustle and to find you and to send you those notes. And like I said before, that's not really a thing that we do. Maybe it's because, I think it's not because we're not motivated. I think it's because we think maybe it would be rude or intrusive. Whereas out there, they call that hustle. Where I'm from Michigan, we call that stalking, but in LA, it's super common.
Yeah, totally.
It can still be stalking in LA.
We all have that
There are
kind
lots
of
stalkers in LA.
Yeah,
But it's been really beneficial too.
For sure. We all have that small voice in our head that's kind of preventing us from maybe reaching out and doing those things somehow. But I do think if you do it, definitely there's ways to do that that don't seem so transactional, or like you're actually, wanting something more than just saying, hey, saw your film, really appreciated the work that you did, and just wanted to tell you. I mean, I think we've all done that on some level, but you do have to walk that fine line so you don't go into stalking / being rude, for sure. But it's just nice after, let's just be human for a second. It's nice after putting so much work into something that, just somebody said, even if like one person said, oh, I saw that. I mean, that's a good feeling, and it does kind of keep you going.
I'm curious, like how everyone stays motivated, but also, because I feel like I'm always juggling so many things, like trying to stay motivated, but also keeping a full-time job to like pay the bills. So does anyone like, and I have a 2-year-old, so it's like trying to there's some days where it's like, I can like, if I don't get up at 5, then I don't have any time to do anything. Or if I stay up like on Saturdays or Sundays or something like that. But like, do you guys have any like tips or tricks on how to like juggle like your work life and then also your passion? Like, is anyone here don't have it just doing this 24/7 as a full-time gig and getting paid for it?
I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it 24/7 per se, but I also have 2 kids, 5 and 6. I'm on Tuesdays and Thursday evenings. I'm actually a refugee advocate. And then I'm working a full-time job that's 9 to 5. But I keep a schedule where starting at like 8:45, 9 p.m., I actually screenwrite from 9 p.m. to about 4:30 in the morning. And so that's the key to my
So don't sleep.
Getting it all done is, and people that are online late at night, they'll be like, Lily, seriously, like just stop. It's late.
How much cocaine
that's how I do it. I squeeze it all in. I squeeze it in and I sleep very little.
That's superhuman.
Yeah. So
what the hell is
there you go, Kevin.
How many hours do you write like a day? So you said is that every day, Monday?
Every day, 7 days a week, even Christmas, quite literally. So Mondays through Fridays, I've actually broken it up. You guys can, I'd love to share my calendar. It's sick. But Mondays through Fridays, I screenwrite from 9 p.m. sharp. If I'm late, I make up the time. I brutalize myself. And then I don't stop until at least 4. 4 a.m.
Wow.
is my sleeping time. But if I've started a little late or I had some other things come up, I'll go to 4:30 or 5. Then I'll crash, I'll sleep, I'll get up at 7:40 to make sure my, because of the pandemic. So then I'll wake up at 7:40, make sure he's in front of the computer for 7:45. He's great, he's on autopilot now. And then I go back to sleep until exactly 9. And at 9, I jump up and I log in onto my corporate Slack, and then I go. And then as soon as he's done with school, I keep him busy with activities. I've got the other one, I keep him busy with activities because he's too young for school. And then I do HelloFresh because I can't be bothered to think of what we're going to possibly have for dinner. And then I start screenwriting.
None of that was helpful. It's like,
But what I'm trying to say is
it's not.
My advice is be unreasonable, torture your body, drink a lot of caffeine, and just don't think about health.
And this is why Lily has an agent and a manager. And
These are also the ways in which my mental health severely suffers if I attempt like 5% of that. So good on you for your resilience.
So yeah, it's not easy.
I text Curtis last night after watching your episode. I'm like, oh man, she really got a fire under my ass. Like I feel so inspired now, or I should just give up and take a nap because I don't think I could ever.
You can't compete with that. How do you compete with that?
Well, on Saturdays and Sundays, it's a little harder. I should say on Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays. Because on Fridays and Saturdays, I don't have to wake up the next day. So I'll let myself, so like last night, I actually went to bed closer to 7 a.m. And then I slept until about noon. So I allowed myself what felt like a little bit of extra sleep. Yeah, you know, I want this really badly. This is the sacrifice required.
Do you care about page count?
Not helpful.
In a day?
I'm sorry, what?
Do you try to hit like a page count? Like I'll write 5 pages today, or it's just like if I'm logged in, like that's fine. I might stare at a blank page for those hours, but as long as I'm like clocked in, like.
I don't have a page set count. I used to do that, and then I found that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. I was sometimes forcing myself to write stuff that was just absolute piss, and I was like, well, I made my page count. That goal didn't work for me. My goal simply is to just be nonstop, to not get up unless it's like to do the pace around so I can say I walked once every hour. But I'm locked in, I'm doing research, I'm doing interviews, talking to industry people, talking to people in their industries to make sure I'm translating what they do correctly on the page, and just writing. And then, you know, I'm seeing, Kevin, that you have a lot of sticky notes on your wall. That is me as well. And this wall over here looks like a killer lives in my house because a lot of the notes on there are like how can we murder him with no fingerprints, you know, whatever. But you know, you just, like I said, whatever it takes. That's my philosophy. Whatever it takes.
I do think, and this isn't meant as a criticism at all, but I do think we have to also say that, you know, Kevin, you're going to find your own way of doing things, right? And it may not look like Lily's, and that's fine too. And
probably better.
Yeah. and so being okay with that, but also finding something that is going to, I mean, I think, you know, Grace, we talked a lot about, you know, expectations being placed on people while doing work that made them, as Jim said, like mentally not capable of doing that. That pressure that we all have felt when we're working on a film set to, you know, maintain a certain, because everybody else is doing it like this, we should do it like this, and all the problems that come from doing that. And so if somebody like Lily can work in that capacity and not be mentally damaged or, from it. I think that's great. But I don't think, Kevin, you should feel the pressure to do that if that's not going to work for you, if that makes some sort of sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that it is, again, in keeping with kind of these conversations in general, and that like kind of what Misha said too, we don't want to be kind of reductive of anything, that every person has their exact own, path that they have to figure out. And sometimes, one thing will work for someone, perfectly, and it won't work at all for another person. And yeah, that's not even close to what my terrible writing schedule is. So
Yeah, I even feel like your process changed, at least for me, just like given the month or the year, like something like you and I talked about this, Curtis, like something that worked for me 6 months ago, it's not working now. So it's like, I gotta switch it up and try something new. I don't feel like I ever have like a set process that I was like, I can like do something like clockwork. It just, I don't think my mind works like that. I think it also depends on the season. So
Yeah.
it's like, so I'm curious, like people in California, if it's like during the winter months, if they're just zapped, or it's like, it's always been curious of like how that mentally affects like Midwesterners, where it's like you have these months where it's like you're just hunkered inside and you don't want to go anywhere because it's so cold, which is only impacted by the pandemic. But
I mean, I think there's value in using nature as a pattern or as an example. I've experimented where nature has seasons, or certain hemispheres have seasons, right? So if the seeds you plant, if you're planting seeds in winter and you expect them to grow in a few months, you probably just killed a bunch of seeds. So I've tried to be gentle with myself and really use nature as a pattern to go, it's okay. I'm most the inception of my ideas are probably most fresh and available in spring and summertime, and usually follows when I reap the rewards of what I tried to create during the spring and summer, and thrown out to festivals. And then December, or winter, I try to give myself permission to treat it as death, right? In nature, it's the death cycle, and to go, all right, how can I sit within this cycle and look at what I've done over the year, and try come harvest, or not harvest time, but reaping or no sowing time, when it's time to sow. What have I learned? Because also sometimes it's out of your hands, right? It's a bad crop or a bad season. Yeah. And Kevin, for me, trying to write is like I try to treat it like an affair. Sometimes it's happening every day, and sometimes you bump into the person a year later in a faraway country, and you have at it for a few weeks. So if I can approach my writing with that kind of sensual curiosity, that's fine by me.
All right, now we're getting down to
Yeah, love it.
all right, let's go.
we should have done the episode on that. I mean, no. Are there other things that people may be struggling with that they want to throw out to a group of filmmakers? I mean, I think that was great of you, Kevin, to suggest something like that. But
Well, I'm kind of like a very opposite of all of this, in that I used to, and I'm like, Lily, fucking go. Because if you're in a place in your life where that's working for you, damn, do it, and you'll get what you want. But I feel like that phase of my life was ended 3 years ago, and I realized it very quickly. And I now, instead of sleeping 4 hours a night and working the rest of the day, I need a full 8 hours of sleep every night, which feels gratuitous, but I need to do that, or else my brain doesn't function and I don't perform as well. And so it's actually it really is. I've discovered that I need to set limits as opposed to setting goals, because goals don't really work for me. I think I'm a Capricorn. I'm one of those people where I'm just I wake up and I want to do work. That just feels good to me. But deciding that I need to stop at some point and not even think about that work is actually where I feel like I've grown in a more productive way. And that honestly reflects in the work that I do and how I feel about it. There's much less dread and pressure and frustration with work since I've decided to actually take seriously the fact that, you know, it's like the whole idea that we're animals and not machines, that you need to be flexible with yourself sometimes if you find that something's not working. So I think that just like as another, you know, tidbit to throw into the hat here of like, what can I do? It could also be doing less, and it could be doing less thinking about what you're doing.
I mean, for me, I was kind of like Lily, like with acting in Los Angeles, and it burned me out. And so I kind of had to find like a healthier approach to the art form that I love versus like full steam ahead and like blinders on. And part of that is just getting inspiration from living in life, and that recharges me and makes me feel like I want to work. I think during this time I've really struggled because I find lack of inspiration besides having to be on a computer and trying to find inspiration online. But now that it's warmed up a little bit in Chicago, I find myself out walking and like paying attention to little like stories that might happen over here, you know, like just being aware a little bit more. But I think also just fitting in like you can. She fits it in the nighttime, and that's the time you can do it. It's nice to have a schedule as well, especially for writing. I don't really write that often, so but for writing, I think finding a schedule is really good.
Yeah.
And Robert, you said that you try to write every day, right? And you've been keeping that up for years now.
Yeah. Yeah, not as much as Leanne or Lily, because I'm a human. But yeah, I think I found pretty early on that like, because I had for a long time I worked a full-time 9 to 5 with like an hour-and-a-half commute every day, plus you know other obligations in life. And I just had to kind of be radical in like finding time. And the best way for me was like waking up at 6 or 7 a.m. and writing before I went to my day job. It's not the schedule that works for everyone, but I don't know. I think it's just like for me, like doing it every day was just easier than trying to like wait for inspiration or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like stopped. I cut out a lot of stuff. Like I think I stopped watching TV and I drank less. You know, I like when I did an inventory of my life, there was like a lot of stuff that was like taking up time that wasn't what I wanted to do. And kind of like what Grace said about like not taking on too much. I've also like, because I always have like 50 projects that like seem cool at any given time. I've just tried to like focus on one at a time and like think about like which one is like the most important to me, whatever that means like at the time, whether it's like inspiration or career or money or whatever it happens to be. Just saying no to a lot of stuff and like trying to like only make stuff that I really, really find to be satisfying in some way.
Yeah, I think giving myself permission to put things down indefinitely has been beneficial for just sort of like the overall scheme of finding fulfillment in the work. Like I'm actually like learning to feel good about not touching certain things that, you know, I was excited about for a little while and just kind of like full steam ahead, and then sort of beating myself up over not feeling the same excitement. And then just kind of, I guess, learning to identify the sort of push and pull to that. And obviously, if you're on deadlines and you owe things to people, that's different than writing for yourself. But you know, which makes it all the more worthwhile when I can take advantage of that, you know, when I'm not like screwing someone over by not delivering X. So
yeah, I was gonna say I definitely have some of the same issues with like juggling multiple things at once and not knowing when to prioritize what. And I always end up prioritizing like the least important thing first because it's like more fun or easy, and then I get distracted by another, you know, shiny object or something. But like I was gonna ask, yeah, like Jim, since you're working on like, you know, a feature at the moment and like a longer form thing, like is there anything specifically, I think we talked a little bit about this too in our conversation, but like again, working on, it's true with writing a feature, writing any kind of writing, but like how do you keep motivated on the one singular thing when you need little, like you need little endorphin rewards, you know, like throughout the process? And like how do you keep like, I mean, I assume you keep a fairly set schedule to like knock off certain kind of things from your to-do list, but like how do you keep excited about a project?
Yeah, keeping excited, I guess, I think part of that is giving myself permission to not be super in love with it at times, and sort of understanding that that is maybe just me where I'm at emotionally at that point, and then, you know, sort of reveling in the self-congratulatory moments where I could then revisit it and be like, yeah, this is really awesome, I'm excited to do this. And just sort of like being aware that, you know, there's a whole spectrum to that. And sort of going back to my earlier point, I think, you know, there's a time where you really have to motivate yourself to be, you know, performing at that top level. Like I just finished this huge grant application, you know, and that's not the time to phone it in, but, you know, at the same time, like there are ways you motivate yourself knowing that, like, you know, once you break something down and like, you know, feel good about like sort of, you know, knocking off like the little questions of like a, you know, 40-page questionnaire, and like knowing when to sort of take breaks or, you know, step away from something and revisit it after you've, you know, run yourself ragged and sort of done something else for an hour. You know, I think given the pandemic, watching a lot of stupid media and like not trying to challenge myself with watching really like challenging things like I did throughout my 20s has been really helpful in maintaining like motivation for my own thing. If anything, it's like kind of this selfish way of like seeing like a complete colossal failure and being like, well, if they fucking did that, man, I'm gonna succeed with mine. So
that's a good tip. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've sort of done that for years where like I'll watch everything, and even if I have like really visceral negative reactions to certain genres or whatever, if it sort of helps me think about what I don't want to do in my own work, you know, I think that's just as helpful.
Yeah, Sonic the Hedgehog was a great inspiration for me.
My kids made me watch that.
It's like a 2-minute Olive Garden plug at the denouement. It's like, what's going on?
I need to see that.
Well, as we kind of wind things down here, just wanted to reiterate how grateful we are to all of you for participating in this first session. Curtis and I still feel that this is very much a nascent sort of project. We're not really even sure what it is or where it's going. We thought we might throw that out as kind of a last question as to like, what could a space like this be used for? Because we're kind of unsure ourselves. We kind of started it it was more than a whim, but less than a hard decision. And so we hope that it's a resource and a conduit for things, but we're not sure for what. So, I mean, do people have thoughts on their experience in participating in this first round and how we might move forward as, you know, a project and as a community. Or did we do everything right?
Perfect, thank you.
I don't think it should stop. I mean, obviously, I'm all about kind of like the democratizing, you know, production and creativity in this city. And I think step one is just communication with that. And I know some folks talk about being gridlocked or not being able to get past the gatekeepers of whatever. But I'm like, there are no gatekeepers if you're just all talking to each other, you know? So there is a way to like, there is a way to work against that. And I think continuing to do things like this, whether it's in the context of Zoom conversations or not, is part of building that up. My dog agrees with me also.
Good, good.
Absolutely. I hats off to you guys for sort of coming up with this and bringing us all on board. I think it's a really strong start, and it feels like something that is alive beyond these conversations we've had. Certainly, these conversations have been useful, but it's really not like the be all end all of how we make things. So it definitely feels like the start of an ongoing conversation.
I
Yeah,
honestly hope to work with some of you guys. I think that'd be great.
Awesome.
Yeah, keep it going. Also, I think this would be good as a podcast also.
I was gonna say, this really feels like a great podcast.
You hear that, Curtis?
Knew they were gonna tell us to make a podcast.
Some of us listen to lots of podcasts and don't have time to watch YouTube videos.
Fair. That's fair.
Nice. It was nice talking to all of you in real time, because full disclosure, I was at 2x, just like, all right, quicker. But
Yeah.
You know, I also think it's what I'm really excited is also getting to, you know, meet everyone here today. But even whether format change or duration or whatever, you kind of created conversations, or even in terms of kind of scaling within the community and alleviating the burden for you and Bradley, Curtis, you know, whether it's guest interviewers, and to try and create this web of connections and to sort of bring it back together. And, you know, I know I've had chats with Bradley about creating cohorts and community, and there's, you know, IFA and different things within Chicago, but just any sort of way to reach the tentacles out and bring people together is really, to me, exciting. Because, you know, I'm not familiar with Jim's work, and I listened to your talk and I was like, oh, I'm going to go on his website and watch some of his shorts. I got to watch Emily's feature a couple days ago, and I'll probably send you an email in a bit. But it's just nice things I wouldn't be aware of, or scrolling through on Instagram somewhat resentfully and begrudgingly to see it in more of a long form context. Can see the humanity behind players in the field.
Definitely. I'll just say that one of Bradley and I's initial ideas was to really kind of branch out and like have, you know, possibly, you know, each of you talk with other people in your network or things like that. And like really, yeah, keep it so it's not necessarily us as hosts, whether that, you know, translates to that kind of iteration or not, we'll see. But yeah, I think it's definitely in keeping, you know, with the same things that we talked about, that the community is so spread out. The fact that, you know, some of us don't know each other is just kind of like, or haven't seen each other's work is just kind of ridiculous. So hopefully this spreads across into a more diverse group and, you know, lots of different thoughts of process.
Yeah, the fact that everybody here is only like 1 degree of separation away from one another, but yet still we don't all know one another, is something that we could definitely work on as a community, and hopefully something that a project like this could help to correct. And so, yeah, we'll of course be talking to all of you about, you know, your further thoughts and ideas when it comes to things like this and moving forward. But also we want to hear from members in our community that we're slowly growing on our, you know, Facebook page and what have you. feel free to respond with accordingly to anything that you've heard here today. But know that it's an ongoing process, and it's going to be as much or as little as we all kind of collectively decide for it to be. And we really, Curtis and I both really were adamant about trying to make it where it's not, I mean, we kind of did everything so it wouldn't be a podcast, but I do understand that, that's,
Sorry.
I mean, no, it's a natural thought. And, as we've gone on, it's become somewhere between a podcast and what we originally kind of saw it as. But that is to say, one of the ways in which it becomes less of that, but just as accessible and perhaps just as useful, is that we all start, participating. And so, yeah, this has been great, you all. I don't know, do you have any wrap up words of wisdom?
I don't have anything. Does anyone else have anything?
If anyone here wants to DM or virtual coffee or something with me sometime, I'm game.
Yeah.
When are you free though? It seems like your schedule is totally
She doesn't sleep. She's free all the time.
5
I
a.m.
make the
Sounds
time,
like
believe me.
Good
I would
window.
love to.
No, that would be great. Thank you for this, and we'll talk to everybody later.
Yeah. Let's do it again.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.